I was curled up on the cold bathroom tile, the pain pulsing like fire through my ribs. Every shallow breath felt like it might tear me in half. The dim light buzzed above me, casting long shadows, and for a second, I could almost forget where I was, until her voice pierced the door. "Rachel, hush. You're going to ruin everything for him." My mother's words didn't come with worry. They came with warning, flat, final. That was the moment it hit me. I didn't have a family. I had a stage crew, quietly sweeping my blood under the rug so their star could still shine. My name is Rachel Moore. I'm 27 years old, and I live in Columbus, Ohio. I teach second grade. Most days, I help my students learn how to use their words, but no one ever taught me how to use mine. If you've ever felt like you had to shrink yourself to keep the peace, if you've ever been told to be quiet when someone hurt you, this story is for you. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters. Let's speak louder, together. I never imagined it would end like this, curled up and gasping, with the taste of metal in my mouth, and my mother choosing silence over me. Earlier that evening, Brady had stormed in after his team lost a crucial game. The front door slammed like a gunshot. I was wiping down the counters in the kitchen, just trying to stay out of his way. But rage doesn't need a reason. "What are you staring at?" he barked. "Nothing," I whispered. "I was just cleaning up." I made the mistake of trying to soften the air. "It's just one game. You'll bounce back." His glare sharpened like glass. "Say that again." I didn't get the chance. He grabbed my shirt, slammed me against the counter so hard I felt something crack. Then came the kick, right where I'd hit. The sound echoed in my bones. The world faded. I must have blacked out. When I came to, my cheek was pressed to the bathroom floor, cold against my skin. My body wouldn't move the way I told it to. My chest burned like it was folding in on itself. Then I heard footsteps, my mother's heels clicking across the tile. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't even look me in the eyes. "Your father's coming," she whispered urgently. "You need to get up. Just say you tripped. You know how fragile he is right now." Fragile? She meant Brady, the boy who'd left me gasping on the floor. She knelt beside me, but not to comfort me, only to contain me. "Say it was an accident," she hissed. "Say you slipped. His draft is in 2 months. Don't throw his life away over one mistake." But it wasn't one mistake. It was a lifetime of them. I dragged myself into the downstairs bathroom, locked the door, and sank to the floor. Through the thin wood, her voice followed. "Keep quiet, Rachel. Please, just keep quiet." And in that silence, I knew. I had never been their daughter, just a variable in the equation of Brady's success. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I could stay silent anymore. The morning after, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, what little I could recognize of it. My left eye was swollen. My lip had a faint split. Beneath the collar of my sweatshirt, bruises bloomed down my side like a map of every place he touched with violence. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried in years. Some people fight, some people run. Me? I freeze. I learn to vanish without leaving the room. I'm Rachel Moore, 27 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and I teach second grade at Ridgewood Elementary. I love coloring books, spelling bees, and the way kids will tell you the truth even when it's messy. I wasn't always this quiet, but in my family, silence was survival, and I was good at surviving. When I was little, I thought if I followed every rule, said please and thank you, made straight A's, folded the laundry without being asked, my parents would notice. I thought if I was useful enough, small enough, invisible enough, maybe they'd love me the way they loved Brady. My little brother, Brady Moore, was never little, not in my parents' eyes. By 16, he had a varsity jacket and a full trophy shelf. My dad called him the franchise. My mom made his favorite protein shakes every morning like it was part of her religion. Every time he scored a basket, it was as if the whole house exhaled in relief, like his success kept our family from falling apart. Meanwhile, I became the ghost in the photos. They didn't mean to erase me, but they never really saw me either. I remember once, I brought home a college acceptance letter, full scholarship. I handed it to my dad at dinner. He glanced at it and said, "That's great, honey. Can you pass the salt?" Brady had gotten a B+ that week. He got a new pair of sneakers and a steak dinner. I moved out after college, rented a tiny studio in the city. It was cramped and drafty, but it was mine. I had peace, quiet. My name on the lease felt like a declaration. I exist. But 6 months ago, when the lease ended, I moved back in with my parents. I told myself it was to save for a down payment. Truthfully, it was something far more dangerous: hope. I thought maybe things had changed. Maybe they'd see me now, not as a background character in Brady's highlight reel, but as someone with value, someone worth hearing. Instead, I stepped right back into my old role: silent helper, emotional sponge, collateral damage. That night on the tile wasn't an accident. It was the climax of 1,000 quiet betrayals. And as I stared into that mirror, trying to piece together the woman looking back at me, I realized I didn't need to disappear anymore. Maybe it was time I spoke up, even if my voice still shook. It's strange how a house can feel like it belongs to someone who doesn't even pay the mortgage. The moment I moved back in, it was clear. I was just a guest in Brady's kingdom. His trophies lined the mantel where family photos used to sit, like holy relics: framed newspaper clippings, basketball medals, even an autographed jersey from a college scout he hadn't signed with yet, all displayed under a spotlight my parents never turned off. And me? I couldn't even find my old high school graduation photo. It used to hang in the hallway. Now it was probably in a drawer, or worse, shoved behind one of his plaques. Brady Moore. 24 years old. 6'3", natural charisma, a jump shot that could silence an entire gymnasium, and a temper that could ruin dinner in seconds. He wasn't born special. He was made that way, built by the hopes of two parents who needed something to believe in, something bright enough to blind them from the cracks in our family. "He's our ticket," Dad once whispered to Mom after a game. I was 10. I heard it from the back seat, pretending to sleep. I didn't know what it meant then, but I felt the shift. From that night on, Brady stopped being a boy. He became the investment. Everything revolved around him. My mom, Linda, kept a whiteboard calendar in the kitchen labeled Brady's Week. Each box color-coded: weight training, nutrition appointments, game days, massage therapy. My name wasn't on the board. When he came downstairs, freshly showered after a workout, she greeted him with a smoothie and a kiss on the cheek. "How'd it go today, baby?" "Felt strong," he'd say, draining the blender bottle like it held magic. Meanwhile, I'd just finished folding their laundry or prepping dinner, quietly slipping into the background like I always did. One afternoon, as I was setting the table, I overheard them in the living room. "Rachel should be grateful she can stay here rent-free," Dad said. "She doesn't understand how lucky she is," Mom added. Lucky. I was lucky to live in a house where my opinions didn't matter, my silence was expected, and my presence was only tolerated if I stayed small. There were warning signs. Of course there were. Brady's bedroom door had dents. He said he tripped. His ex-girlfriend left her jacket once and never came back. Sometimes I'd hear loud thuds upstairs and Mom saying, "Brady, breathe, please." But no one ever questioned him, because Brady wasn't just a person. He was a projection, a future, a dream. I saw it all. I swallowed it all. And I kept smiling through dinner. Because in our house, speaking up meant betrayal. And I was still clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, loyalty would finally look like love. There were signs. Not subtle ones either, the kind you trip over because you've been told not to look down. It started with the dents. Brady's bedroom door had 3 of them. Clean, rounded indents at shoulder height. One day, I was dusting the hallway when I noticed them. I asked, "What happened to your door?" He didn't even blink. "Basketball. I slipped." "Right. Because basketballs have fists now." Then there was the jacket. A denim one, soft from wear, hung by the stairs for weeks. It belonged to Kaylee, his girlfriend. Or ex, I guess. She used to come over on weekends, sweet, shy, polite. She'd help Mom with the dishes and bring over homemade cookies. One day, she just stopped showing up. I asked Mom once, "Did Kaylee and Brady break up?" Her eyes flicked away. She wasn't right for him. She didn't understand the pressure he's under. The pressure. That's what they always called it. The invisible monster Brady carried, like it justified everything. I saw how his moods could shift the air in the house. One slammed door and dinner went cold. One curse from the stairs and Mom would start rearranging her day to fix whatever invisible wire had snapped. And Dad, he just pretended not to hear. One night, Brady came home after a rough practice. I was on the couch, grading spelling tests. He tossed his duffel bag hard enough to knock over a floor lamp. "Watch it," I said, startled. He turned slowly. "What did you just say?" I felt the chill in my spine before I even finished answering. I just meant, never mind." He didn't move, just stared. Long enough for me to pack up my papers and disappear upstairs. At first, I thought maybe it was just me. Maybe I was overreacting. I'd spent so long quiet I'd forgotten what normal even looked like. But one evening, I found Mom in the laundry room, folding his jerseys with trembling hands. She flinched when I walked in. "You okay?" I asked. She forced a smile. "Just tired." Then she added, "Don't say anything tonight. He's in a mood." That's when I knew it wasn't just me. Still, I said nothing. Because in my family, silence wasn't weakness. It was loyalty. To speak up meant disloyalty. To Brady, to the dream, to the illusion of perfection. And I'd spent my entire life trying not to be the problem. But silence doesn't protect you. It just builds a cage and convinces you it's home. Saturday night in our house was usually one of two things: celebration or silence. There was no middle ground, only the scoreboard. That night, the silence came first. Brady had a showcase game, the kind scouts from the Midwest Conference flew in to watch. Mom ironed his warm-up jacket twice. Dad sat glued to the pre-game commentary like it was a court hearing. I stayed out of the way. Made dinner, cleaned the dishes, pretended not to feel the tension sticking to the walls like steam. He lost. Missed 2 free throws in the final minute. His team dropped by 5. It was nearly midnight when the front door slammed open. I was in the kitchen wiping down the counters, trying to finish my nightly routine before bed. His footsteps were heavy, uneven. The sharp pop of a beer can broke the silence. Brady reeked of sweat and stale alcohol. He threw his duffel down hard. "What are you looking at?" he snapped, his voice thick and raw. I didn't even know I was looking at him. I had a sponge in one hand and the other wrapped around my waist like a shield. "Nothing," I said softly. "Just cleaning up." He opened the fridge, grabbed another can, slammed the door so hard the magnets fell. His back was to me. "That coach is a damn idiot," he muttered. "That game was rigged." I hesitated, then offered something, anything, to calm the storm. "It was just one game, Brady. You'll bounce back." He turned slowly. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw clenched tight. "Just one game," he repeated. Quiet now. Too quiet. I tried to smile. "It's not the end of the world." That was it. That was the match that lit the fuse. He moved faster than I thought someone with that much rage could. One moment, I was standing near the sink. The next, his hand was gripping the front of my hoodie, twisting the fabric so hard it pressed into my collarbone. "You think this is funny?" he hissed. "No, Brady. Stop. I didn't—" But my words never reached him. He slammed me into the counter, granite edge slicing into my ribs. The air rushed out of my lungs like a balloon popped in my chest. I collapsed, landing hard against the tile. Then came the kick, right where I hit. The sound was thick, deep, like something inside me cracked. I remember the silence afterward more than the blow. Like the entire world went mute. My vision tunneled. The edges went dark. Somewhere in the distance, I heard my mother calling his name. I don't remember blacking out. I just remember waking up on the floor, face pressed to cold ceramic, every breath a knife. And the worst part? I still blamed myself. For the words I said. For not staying invisible enough. I came to in fragments. The ceiling light buzzed above me like a faraway engine. My lungs fought for air that wouldn't come. Every movement sent a sharp jolt through my side, as if my ribs were splintered glass. I wasn't sure how long I'd been lying there, motionless, until I heard footsteps, quick and purposeful. Then her voice. "Rachel?" It was my mother. She dropped to her knees beside me, but she didn't touch me. Her eyes weren't on my face. They were fixed on the hallway, on the stairs, listening. "Rachel, get up," she whispered sharply. "Your father's almost home." I tried. I really did. But I couldn't move. The pain was too sharp, too sudden. My lips barely formed the words. I can't. I can't breathe." Her eyes finally met mine. Not with concern. With fear, but not fear for me. Fear of him. "Okay, then listen to me." Her voice dropped into something cold and practiced. "You tripped. You hit the counter. That's what happened." I blinked. She leaned in closer. "You tripped, Rachel. Understand? He's not in a good place right now. This could ruin everything. His agents are calling next week. If this gets out—" I choked on my own breath, her words slicing sharper than the bruises blooming beneath my ribs. He broke me, and all she cared about was his future. "Mom!" I gasped. I wanted to ask why. Why she didn't see me, why I didn't matter, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was shake my head, slow, trembling, helpless. She exhaled sharply, stood up, and smoothed her blouse like she had somewhere more important to be. "Just stay in here until you can pull yourself together," she muttered. "And don't make a scene." Then she walked out, heels tapping briskly across the tile, her phone already in her hand. Probably texting Dad. Probably rehearsing the story. I stared at the bathroom door as it closed behind her. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. My whole body ached with betrayal, deeper than the bruises, deeper than the breaks. I dragged myself forward, inch by inch, until I reached the door. I turned the lock with a trembling hand and slid down again, landing in a heap on the cold floor. Outside, voices began to rise in muffled urgency. My mother's frantic tone, my father's low grumble, Brady stomping up the stairs like nothing happened. He went to bed. After everything, he just went to bed. Then came the final blow. Through the thin wood of the door, I heard her voice one more time. Calm. Icy. "Keep quiet, Rachel. You'll ruin his future." And with that, I stopped waiting to be rescued. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was damage control. The tile was cold beneath me, but the silence was colder. Outside the locked bathroom door, I could hear the house breathing again. Footsteps, a low exchange of voices, my mother whispering with tight urgency. My father's voice, steady and firm like always, and then Brady's door slammed shut upstairs. He was done for the night, just like that. Meanwhile, I couldn't move without screaming on the inside. My ribs felt like they were being squeezed by invisible hands. Each breath came in tight, shallow gasps. My body shook, not just from pain but from something deeper, something raw, shame, fury. The quiet realization that everything I once believed about this house, this family, had cracked wide open. I pressed my back to the door, knees pulled to my chest, arms crossed tight around my middle like I could hold myself together if I just curled small enough. In the flickering hallway light beneath the door, shadows passed like ghosts. I half hoped my mother would knock, that she'd come back and say, "I'm sorry," that she'd whisper, "We'll fix this. You don't have to carry it alone." But no one came. What I got instead was her voice, clear, deliberate, slicing through the silence like a blade. "Keep quiet, Rachel. You'll ruin his future." Those 7 words gutted whatever part of me was still reaching for her. She wasn't afraid for me. She was afraid of me. Afraid I might speak, might shatter the image they'd spent years polishing. I don't remember standing. I just remember crawling, inch by inch, out of the bathroom and across the hall to the laundry room. I used the washer to pull myself up. My vision swam with every breath, but I found the strength to keep going. I locked the door behind me, sat on the floor again. This time, not because I fell, but because I needed to disappear, to shrink into something so small, so still, that even my own pain couldn't find me. I don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes, hours. It felt like days pressed into one endless night. Every sound outside that door became an alarm. Footsteps, shifting floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator. I stayed hidden, listening to the people who were supposed to protect me trade fear like currency. Brady had gone to bed. My father was handling logistics, my mother was maintaining the story, and me? I was bleeding into the silence, still trying to convince myself that this wasn't the end, that maybe, somehow, this was salvageable. But I was lying to myself, because in that hidden corner of the house, I finally saw it. This wasn't just one bad night, it was the truth catching up to me. And it had a name, Brady. Morning came like a punishment. Every movement hurt. I couldn't stand up straight, couldn't inhale without feeling like someone was pushing a knife into my side. I moved slowly. One hand braced against the wall as I made my way to the living room, where my father sat waiting, already dressed, keys in hand. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't even look me in the eyes. "Get in the car," he said flatly. "We're going to urgent care." I didn't speak. I just nodded. Not because I agreed, because I was trained to obey. The ride was silent. Outside, the world looked normal. Neighbors walked their dogs. A kid rode his bike past a lawn covered in leaves. It felt surreal, like I'd somehow fallen out of the world and no one noticed. My father kept his eyes on the road, hands tight on the steering wheel. Then, without turning, he spoke. "You fell down the stairs." It wasn't a question. "That's what you'll tell them," he continued. "You missed a step." Landed wrong. You know how clumsy you can be when you're tired. I stared at the side of his face, searching for something, remorse, doubt, even discomfort. Nothing, just stone. "Rachel, your mother is distraught. Your brother barely slept. We do not need more chaos right now. Promise me, no drama." No drama, just cracked ribs and silent suffering. "I promise," I said quietly, because it was easier, because I had nothing left in me to fight with. At the clinic, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and every sound felt louder than it should. Footsteps, ringing phones, the ticking of the wall clock. A nurse took my vitals, eyes flicking to the bruises beneath my sweatshirt sleeve. "What happened?" she asked gently. I swallowed hard. "I fell down the stairs." The words tasted like rust. Then the door opened, and she walked in. Dr. Karen Miles. She had a calmness that didn't feel forced. Her name tag caught the light as she glanced at my chart, then at me. She didn't ask how I was right away. She sat down, took a breath, and said, "Rachel, I'm just going to check your ribs, okay?" She pressed lightly against my side, and the cry escaped before I could stop it. Pain shot through me like lightning. Her expression shifted, just slightly. But I saw it. Concern. Real, human concern. Then her voice dropped low. "Rachel, these bruises, they don't line up with a fall." I froze. She waited, didn't push, just offered the space. And in that silence, something began to crack open inside me. Not because I was ready to speak the truth, but because, for the first time, someone saw it, without me saying a word. The exam room was too bright. Everything, too white, too clean, too still. It made me feel dirtier somehow, like I'd carried something in with me that didn't belong. Dr. Karen Miles entered with a clipboard and calm eyes. She didn't smile politely like most doctors do when they're about to rush through your pain. She sat down slowly, as if the air itself was fragile. "Hi, Rachel. I'm Dr. Miles. Let's take this one step at a time, all right?" I nodded, even though my chest was throbbing with every breath. She asked if she could examine my ribs. I said yes, though my body screamed otherwise. When she gently pressed along my side, my breath caught. The sound that escaped wasn't even a full cry, just a cracked whimper. But it said enough. She paused, then lifted her eyes to meet mine. Not clinical, not detached, just human. "You're in a lot of pain," she said softly. Another nod. She leaned back, folded her hands. "Rachel, can I ask you something?" I tensed. She kept her voice even. "The pattern of bruising here. It doesn't look like a fall. Not from stairs, not from slipping. I just need to know. Did someone hurt you?" Her question didn't hit me like an accusation. It landed like a lifeline. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. The words were buried beneath layers of years, Years of being told to stay small, to keep secrets, to protect the family image at all costs. I thought about my father, sitting in the waiting room, arms crossed, probably rehearsing what he'd say if she pushed too far. I thought about my mother's voice through the bathroom door. "Keep quiet, Rachel. You'll ruin his future." I thought about Brady, the way he didn't flinch after it happened, the way he slept soundly upstairs while I curled up in pain. And I thought about me sitting here, finally being asked. I felt something shift, just a little. A crack in the dam. My lips trembled as the words fell out, quiet, trembling, but real. My brother. Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't gasp or pity me. She just nodded once, like she already knew. "Thank you for telling me," she said gently. Then I panicked. "Please don't say anything," I begged, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand. He'll lose everything. It'll destroy my family." She reached across the small space between us and placed her hand on the edge of the exam table. "Rachel, he broke your ribs." She didn't raise her voice, didn't scold, but her next words were like a match to everything I'd tried to hide. "What about your life?" And for the first time, someone wasn't asking me to protect him. They were asking me to protect me. Miles didn't flinch when I told her. She didn't frown or gasp or press her hand to her chest like in some movie. She just stood up, walked over to the light box, and clipped my x-rays into place. 3 white lines glowed against the black, 2 jagged, 1 hairline. "You have 2 fully fractured ribs and 1 that's partially broken," she said, voice calm but unshakably firm. "This isn't from a fall." I stared at the glowing bones, stunned by how easily truth can be photographed. Evidence. Cold. Undeniable. She turned back to me. I could see it in her posture. Something had shifted. The kindness was still there, but now it carried weight. Responsibility. She picked up a small camera from the drawer and gestured gently. "I'm going to take photos of the bruising now. Just for documentation, is that okay?" I hesitated, then nodded. She took them carefully. No flash, no urgency. Just methodical clicks in a room too quiet for what was really happening. When she finished, she put the camera down and pulled up the rolling stool to face me directly. "Rachel, I want to explain something very clearly. I'm a mandated reporter. That means if I believe you've been harmed, especially in the home, I am legally required to report it." My heart dropped. My hands started to shake. "No," I whispered. "Please, you don't know what this will do." Her eyes didn't move. "You told me your brother did this." "He didn't mean to. Rachel, he fractured your ribs." I looked down, unable to meet her gaze. My voice broke as I pleaded, "It'll ruin his future. He has scouts. He has everything lined up. My parents will never forgive me." She didn't argue. She just waited for my eyes to return to hers. "And what about your future?" she asked. That question hung in the air like a toll bell. Not what about him, not what will happen to them, but what about you? She reached for a form on the counter, her pen already in hand. "I'm calling Child Protective Services because you're currently living in the same household as your abuser. That also means I'm contacting law enforcement. I don't take this lightly, Rachel, but I won't let this be buried." I didn't stop her. I couldn't. Something inside me, something old and worn and deeply obedient, wanted to beg again, to say, "Let me go home, I'll stay quiet, I promise." But another part of me, the part that remembered the bathroom floor and my mother's voice saying, "Don't ruin him," that part stayed silent. Dr. Miles filled out the forms in calm, deliberate strokes, like she'd done this before, like she knew this moment well. And in that small white room, for the first time in my life, someone was choosing me over him. By the time my father pulled the car into our driveway, the world had changed. A black and white patrol car sat idling in front of our house. One officer stood at the base of the porch steps, the other by the open passenger door of the squad car, clipboard in hand, calm but alert. I froze. My father didn't. "Stay here," he said, his voice cold as asphalt. He got out and slammed the door behind him. I watched through the windshield as he approached the officers, shaking his head and gesturing like this was all some terrible misunderstanding. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the script. My hand went to the spot just beneath my ribs, where pain still echoed with every breath. The front door opened. My mother stood in the doorway, her eyes darting between me and the police. I stepped out of the car slowly, my legs stiff. The world felt too sharp, every sound too crisp, like the air itself had turned brittle. Then she snapped. "What did you do?" Her voice cracked, not with fear, but fury. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She stormed toward me, eyes wild. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? Do you know what you've done to your brother?" I backed up a step, instinctively bracing for something. Slap, scream, collapse. I wasn't sure which, but it was my father who reached me first. His hand clamped around my upper arm, not hard enough to bruise, but close. He leaned in, his voice low and venomous. "I told you to keep your mouth shut." I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. Not this time. "You just destroyed your brother's future. I hope you're proud of yourself." But I wasn't listening. Not anymore. Because as they hurled their rage at me, so practiced, so united, I saw them clearly for the first time. Not as parents, but as accomplices. They weren't mourning what had happened. They were mourning that it couldn't be hidden anymore. While their voices tangled and rose, I turned. I walked past them, straight through the front door, into the house that no longer felt like anything to me. I didn't pause. Didn't say a word. I headed upstairs, pulled out the suitcase I'd never fully unpacked, and started folding clothes with slow, steady hands. No plan. No idea where I was going. Just one truth echoing in my chest. I couldn't stay. Not another night. Not another hour. They didn't lose a daughter. They never really wanted one to begin with. The house didn't try to stop me. No slammed doors. No last-minute pleas. Just the rustle of my clothes in a half-zipped suitcase and the soft click of my bedroom light as I turned it off for the last time. I walked past the kitchen, past my mother, who stood frozen with her arms crossed, like she was the one being abandoned. My father didn't look up from his phone. No one asked where I was going. That silence was the final proof. I didn't belong there anymore. Maybe I never did. Dr. Miles had given me a number. She'd scribbled it on a pale blue sticky note before I left the clinic, her voice low but certain. "Call them. They'll help you get out. Even if they don't have a bed, they'll find you a place to land." That number led me to a women's shelter network on the edge of town, one with too few rooms and too many stories like mine. They didn't have space in their main facility, but they knew someone who could help. By that evening, I had a key in hand. A studio apartment, tiny, worn, but mine. Just one room, a mattress on the floor, and a secondhand lamp flickering in the corner like it wasn't sure how to be light anymore. But it was quiet. And for the first time in weeks, I wasn't scared to sleep. The first night, I sat on the mattress with my back against the wall and just breathed. Not deep, not comfortably, but freely. My ribs still ached. My spine felt like it was learning how to hold weight again. But I wasn't in hiding anymore. I wasn't tiptoeing through a house that hated me. It felt like being born at 27, with bruises for skin and a heart that wasn't sure what safe meant yet. The next day, I filed for a restraining order. I stood in the courthouse lobby, surrounded by strangers with manila folders and trauma behind their eyes, and filled out the paperwork with a shaky pen. When the clerk called my name, I stepped forward like I was wearing someone else's shoes. Shoes meant for someone braver. But it was still me. Just a version of me that refused to vanish again. The calls started that night. Voicemails from my mother, crying into the receiver. "You've torn our family apart." Text messages from my father, clipped and cold. "Don't expect help when this all comes crashing down." Even one from Brady, some weak apology I could practically hear being dictated by my parents in the background. I blocked them all. Not out of anger, but self-preservation. I'd spent my whole life being reachable. It was time to become unreachable to the people who had only reached for me when they needed silence. In the weeks that followed, silence became my shield. Not the kind of silence I used to live in, the shrinking kind, the kind that kept me small and invisible. This silence was chosen. Sharp, protective. Every night, my phone lit up with messages I didn't answer. My mother's voice dominated the first voicemail. She wasn't asking if I was okay. She was pleading for Brady. "Rachel, sweetheart, please. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Your brother is devastated. He didn't mean it. He's under so much pressure, you know that. Please call me back. We can fix this, but not like this." The next one was colder. "If you keep going down this path," she warned, "you'll regret it. You're ruining more than just his future. You're tearing this family apart." My father didn't waste words. His text read simply, "You made your choice. Don't come crawling back." The worst was the message from Brady. It started with an awkward pause. Then, "Hey, Rach, look, I'm sorry about everything. I didn't mean to scare you. I just lost it, all right? I'm working on myself. Don't let this destroy what we had." What we had? He'd broken my bones and called it a bad night. That wasn't what we had. That was what he took. I didn't reply. I didn't scream. I didn't explain. I blocked the number. Then I blocked my parents. Then I deleted the messages. Then I turned off notifications. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of survival. One morning, I stood at my window sipping tea from a chipped mug someone had left behind in the apartment before me. Outside, a bus screeched to a stop. A woman laughed as she walked her dog past the building. The world somehow kept moving, and I realized something I hadn't said out loud yet, not even to myself. They weren't trying to make things right. They were trying to pull me back into the lie where Brady was the golden boy, where my pain was inconvenient, where love had terms and silence was the price. Dr. Miles had connected me to a lawyer, a woman named Erica Barnes. Tough voice, fierce eyes, the kind of woman who knew how to stare a lie in the face and make it blink first. She took my case without charge. "He doesn't just get to walk away from this," she told me. "You deserve justice, not just protection, compensation, accountability." It was the first time I'd heard someone use the word deserve like it applied to me, and I believed her, even if my parents didn't, especially because they didn't. Erica Barnes didn't wear power. She wielded it, like a scalpel, precise and unapologetic. From the moment I stepped into her office, I knew I was no longer navigating this storm alone. She wasn't warm in the way Dr. Miles had been, but she didn't need to be. Erica wasn't there to comfort me. She was there to fight. "You're pressing charges," she said, not as a question, but a declaration. "And we're suing him. Hospital bills, emotional distress, pain and suffering, the works." I hesitated. My hands trembled slightly in my lap. "Won't this make everything worse?" I asked. "For my family, I mean?" Erica leaned forward. "Rachel, your family already made their choice. Now it's your turn." The legal process felt overwhelming at first. There were depositions, affidavits, court filings. Brady's name appeared on documents alongside words like aggravated assault and civil liability. Seeing it typed in black and white made everything feel more real and more irreversible. And still, the calls came. My aunt left me a voicemail, furious that I was tearing the family name apart. My cousin texted, "He's not a monster, Rachel. We all lose control sometimes." But Erica made one thing very clear. They can scream, they can guilt trip, but the law doesn't run on family feelings. It runs on facts. And Rachel, you've got a lot of facts. She was right. I had x-rays, medical reports, police documentation, and for the first time a voice that wasn't shaking when it was recorded in the deposition room. The lawsuit reached his team within days. His contract, up for final approval, was suspended pending investigation. Brady went silent. Not a word, not a call, not a performative apology this time. And for once, my parents didn't try to fix it. Maybe they were too busy managing the fallout. Maybe they'd finally realized the lie had grown too big to bury. One afternoon, Erica and I walked out of the courthouse after submitting the formal complaint. The sky was gray, but the air felt lighter. "This is going to take time," she said. "They'll fight it. They always do. But you stood up. That's the hardest part. You already won something, whether the court agrees or not." I looked at her, this woman who barely knew me, who had no stake in my story beyond principle, and felt something unfamiliar take root. Not relief, not justice, something quieter, stronger, agency. Brady's future wasn't gone because of me. It was crumbling under the weight of his own choices. And for the first time, I was building mine. One legal page, one brave answer, one unreturned call at a time. Healing didn't come all at once. It came in inches. It wasn't a moment, it was a series of small, stubborn choices I made alone, in silence, in an apartment that still echoed when I walked across it barefoot. The first thing I did was hang a photo. It was of me, 5 years old, grinning in a crooked ponytail and holding a library card like it was a golden ticket. No Brady in sight, just me. I tacked it to the wall above the second-hand dresser and whispered, "I see you." It felt like a start. Therapy wasn't easy. In the beginning, I'd sit across from a woman named Lisa who wore soft sweaters and asked hard questions. She never pushed, never filled the silence, but she didn't let me hide either. "Tell me about that night," she asked once gently. I hesitated. "Which one?" I said. Her eyes softened, and in that pause I realized something gutting. I hadn't been broken once. I'd been breaking for years. We didn't just talk about Brady. We talked about the dinner tables I sat at in silence, the birthdays where my cake was store-bought and his came from a custom bakery, the way I was always praised for being easy, as if disappearing was something to be rewarded. We talked about love, the kind that makes you feel seen and the kind that makes you feel owed, and how I'd grown up mistaking compliance for connection. Outside of those sessions, healing looked different. It looked like watering a Forder houseplant I named Hope. It looked like walking to the coffee shop around the corner and ordering something for myself without checking my phone. It looked like opening my curtains, sleeping through the night without waking in a cold sweat, leaving the bathroom light off without fear. One day, I passed a mirror and didn't flinch. My bruises had faded, the yellowish tones gave way to skin again, and the sharp ache in my ribs dulled into something quieter, less consuming. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was this new voice inside me, tired but stronger, saying, "You made it out. You're not going back." The world didn't give me a parade. No one from my family reached out to say, "We were wrong." But I did get a text from Lisa after a particularly tough session. Just 3 words. "You're doing it." And I was, not perfectly, not quickly, but truly. One picture on the wall, one full breath, one tiny, stubborn step at a time. It started with a flyer, taped crookedly to a corkboard in the community center lobby where I waited for a therapy group to let out. I wasn't even looking for anything. I was just avoiding eye contact, nursing a half-cold coffee, and trying not to feel out of place. Community Youth Grant. $5,000 available for new programs serving at-risk girls. Deadline? 2 weeks. I stared at it for a long time. At-risk girls. Girls who kept secrets. Girls who lived behind locked doors and careful smiles. Girls like me. I took a photo of the flyer, walked home in silence, and didn't tell anyone. Not at first, not even Lisa, my therapist, because before it could be a plan, it had to be a possibility, and I wasn't ready to hope too loudly yet. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at a blank document on my laptop. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat, and then I typed, "The quiet should speak." I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew what I needed when I was 13 and afraid to go home after school. I knew what I needed at 16 when my parents looked right through me at the dinner table. And I knew what I needed at 27 when I finally said the words, "My brother hurt me." So I built it from that space. A place where girls could be heard, where their truth didn't get buried beneath someone else's reputation, where loyalty didn't mean silence, where speaking up wasn't punished, it was celebrated. I wrote about group sessions, art therapy, mentorship pairings with survivors who had made it to the other side. I wrote about giving these girls the language they were never taught, the boundaries they never knew they could set, the power they never believed they had. And when I finished, I didn't hit save. I hit submit. 2 weeks later, I got the call. I'd won the grant. $5,000 wasn't much. It wouldn't cover office space or full-time staff, but it would be enough for a start. Art supplies, healthy snacks, a rented church basement for once-a-week meetings, enough to open a door. I cried when I hung up the phone. Not because I was proud, not even because I was excited. I cried because for the first time, my pain wasn't just mine. It had somewhere to go, somewhere to grow. And maybe, just maybe, someone else's story would be different because I chose to speak mine. I didn't expect them to come. The girls, I mean. The first Saturday, I unlocked the door to the borrowed church basement. I half wondered if the whole thing had been a mistake, some brave impulse born in the quiet of my trauma that wouldn't hold up in daylight. But they came, one by one, some with their mothers, others alone, shoulders drawn tight, eyes wary. They didn't talk much at first, just sat in folding chairs, hands in their sleeves, watching me like I was a question they weren't ready to answer. I didn't push them. Instead, I opened a box of paints, set out blank canvases and crayons, put on soft music and left the fluorescent lights off. I wanted them to feel like they'd stepped into a different world. Not brighter, but safer. "You don't have to talk today," I said. "You don't have to say anything at all, but this is your space now. No one interrupts you here. No one overrules you. Your voice is yours." Weeks passed and something shifted. A girl named Lexi, 13, drew a picture of a door with no handle and said, "This is what my bedroom feels like." Another girl, Mia, cried when she told the group, "Sometimes I want to disappear, but I don't think I actually want to die. I just want someone to notice I'm alive." I didn't have answers. I didn't offer platitudes, but I listened. And slowly, they listened to each other. One afternoon, after a particularly powerful group session, a woman I'd never met approached me outside. She was quiet, mid-30s, holding a notebook pressed to her chest. "Are you the one who started this?" she asked. "The program?" I nodded. She swallowed hard, then said, "Thank you. My daughter hasn't smiled in a year. But today, she came home and asked me to buy her a journal." She didn't say more. She didn't need to. I stood there on the sidewalk for a while after she left, blinking back tears that came from somewhere deep. This was what reclaiming my voice looked like. Not shouting, not revenge, but building a space where silence wasn't a sentence. It looked like sticky notes on the walls with messages the girls wrote to themselves. "I matter. It wasn't my fault. I am not invisible." It looked like laughter after trust, like art smeared across fingers, like stories told out loud and not erased. Every Saturday, I unlocked that door, and every Saturday, a piece of me healed alongside them. Because giving them permission to speak was how I finally gave it to myself. It happened on a Thursday. We were hosting a small fundraiser for The Quiet Should Speak. Nothing fancy. Just coffee, cookies, folding chairs, and a slideshow of artwork the girls had made over the past 6 months. We held it in the back of the public library, surrounded by bulletin boards and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights. I was standing at the podium, reading from my note cards. My voice was steady, my hands no longer shaking the way they used to. A group of parents sat in the front row, nodding along. Behind them were teachers, counselors, donors, and a few of the girls, smiling, growing. Every time a young girl is told to stay quiet when someone hurts her, something inside her starts to disappear, I said. This program isn't just about healing, it's about helping her find her voice again. The doors at the back of the room burst open, and there he was, Brady. Thinner than I remembered, hollow in the eyes, hair longer, posture still cocky in that defensive, angry way. But the swagger had dulled, like a costume that didn't fit anymore. He pointed a finger straight at me, loud enough to cut through every breath in the room. "You!" he shouted. "You ruined my life!" The room fell dead silent. All because of one stupid mistake, one fall. You couldn't let it go, could you? My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the clarity of the moment. The old me, the girl from the kitchen, curled on cold tile, trying to disappear, would have shrunk into herself, would have apologized, maybe even believed him. But not this me, not anymore. I set my cards on this podium and stepped down, heels clicking softly across the linoleum. I walked into the center aisle, turned toward the crowd, and spoke not to Brady, but to the room. "This," I said, gesturing calmly, "is the man who broke my ribs." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I let the weight of the moment settle, then added, "And this is the family who told me to stay quiet so he wouldn't lose his future." Brady sputtered, face red, fists clenched, but the room wasn't looking at him anymore. They were looking at me, and this time they saw me. Security moved in. Quiet. Professional. They escorted Brady out with little resistance. His final words, angry, incoherent, died in the hallway. I returned to the podium, took a breath, and finished my speech, because this was the life I built, not from revenge, but from truth, from reclaiming what he tried to silence, what they tried to bury, my voice. And now everyone had heard it. The room never fully returned to normal after Brady left. His shouting had been loud, but the silence that followed was louder. It sat thick in the air, heavy like a held breath. Even the sound of a chair creaking or someone shifting felt like it echoed too long. But I stood steady at the front of the room, one hand lightly resting on the podium. And when I spoke again, I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I just said, "Thank you all for being here." Then I smiled, small but real, and the audience rose to their feet, not in a burst of enthusiasm but in something softer, something like understanding. Applause came next, not thunderous, but steady, solid. And in that quiet celebration, I felt something settle inside me, not justice, not revenge, peace. Afterward, people approached me in clusters. A middle-aged man with a teenage daughter said, "I've never heard anyone say it like that. Thank you for being brave." A school counselor asked if she could bring students from her district to visit the program. One of the younger girls who had attended, eyes wide with emotion, hugged me tightly without saying a word, and I understood. Sometimes the loudest thank you lives in the silence between breaths. Brady never came back. Neither did my parents. They didn't call, didn't write, didn't show up at my door or send one last threat. I think they knew they'd already lost the only thing they thought they had control over. My silence. And the thing is, I didn't miss them. There was a time I would have begged for their presence, for some tiny gesture of regret or recognition. But now, the emptiness they left wasn't hollow. It was clean. It made space for new things, healthier things, measured by love, not obligation. In the weeks that followed, I kept unlocking the church basement every Saturday. The girls kept coming. The room kept growing. We added a bookshelf, a whiteboard, a string of soft lights along the ceiling that made everything feel less temporary. I watched them claim their own stories the way I had, quietly, firmly, with shaky voices that grew stronger each week. And that silence? The one that used to bind me? Now it lived in the moments when we no longer needed to explain ourselves, in the stillness after truth was spoken, in the peace that comes from being heard. I never went back to that house, never stood on that porch, never looked for closure at a door that had already closed itself long before I did, because the reckoning wasn't in yelling back. It was in standing still while they lost power in real time and the world didn't end. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can give someone who tried to silence you is your absence, and a silence they no longer control. It's been a year since the fundraiser, a year since Brady stormed into that library, demanding the world stop turning because I dared to speak. But it didn't stop. The world kept moving, and so did I. This morning, I opened the community center a little early. The girls like it that way. They wander in sleepy-eyed, clutching iced coffees and spiral notebooks filled with poetry, sketches, questions they're almost ready to ask out loud. We've added more chairs, more names on the sign-in sheet. The budget is still tight, but we've built something real, something sacred, in that little basement room. And every time I sit in the circle with them, I see the old version of myself in their hesitation, their quiet glances, the way they say sorry before speaking, as if their voice takes up too much space. I always stop them there. Stop. Don't apologize for existing. They nod, and something in them lifts. Just a little. The other day, a girl named Kiara stayed behind after everyone left. She didn't say much, just stood by the door, hugging her coat to her chest. I think I want to tell my mom, she whispered, about what happened. I didn't give advice. I didn't hand her a speech. I just looked her in the eye and said, Your story is yours, and when you're ready to speak it, you'll be surprised how much power it holds." She nodded and left, and I cried, not from sadness, but because I knew she would be okay. As for my family, I don't check for their names anymore. Not in the news, not in my phone, not in my dreams. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's knowing what they did and choosing not to carry it with me every day. I released the hope that they'd ever apologize, and in doing so, I made space for something better. Myself. And now to you, listening to this story. Maybe you've been told to keep quiet. Maybe someone made you feel small so they could stay big. Maybe you've convinced yourself that silence keeps the peace. But I promise you, silence isn't peace. It's a cage. You deserve more than survival. You deserve to be seen, to be protected, to be heard. Because your voice, it matters. Not just to you, but to the girl who might one day sit across from you, looking for permission to speak. So if this story meant something to you, if it stirred something inside your chest that you haven't named yet, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone. And in the comments below, tell me, when did you first learn your voice mattered? Or if you haven't yet, let this be your sign to begin. You are not invisible, you are not broken, and your story is not over.